Hey man,
Hey.
so I hear you like to watch a lot of movies.
Yeah.
So, if you watch a lot of movies, what's your favorite?
Hello and welcome back to VNI Nation. Today we're doing an episode all about our least favorite movies because if we know anything, it's that we have seen way too many good movies to decide which one is our favorite. But the truly memorable movies in our minds are the worst of the worst. So that's what we're doing today. We are outlining our least favorite movies of all time in no particular order. So let's jump right into it.
Well, I would have to say that one of my first top hated movies is Death Note, the live action remake that Netflix did. And I'll try to keep it short because I know a lot of you guys don't like watching anime particularly or don't necessarily understand what I'm talking about. But essentially, this movie came out as a live action, and the anime itself was actually very doable as a live action. A lot of the problems that come from live action movies when they take it from an anime is that a lot of the things require an insane amount of CGI. But the premise of Death Note was that you write a name in a book, and this guy, whatever name you write, dies. But the thing is they made the main character seem kind of headstrong and stupid, when in fact he was one of the smartest people in the show. And it was supposed to be kind of a thriller, but unfortunately it really just wasn't a thriller. It ended up being far, far worse because it basically tried to rework the entire thing, despite the fact that Death Note is a classic that even my wife likes to watch, and she doesn't like to watch anime.
For my first pick, I want to talk about Suicide Squad because we kind of dissed on it earlier when we talked about Birds of Prey, saying that Birds of Prey was way better than Suicide Squad, and it is by far. Now, most people might say that, well, Suicide Squad wasn't like that bad of a movie, but it really was. There were a lot of characters in Suicide Squad, and not a whole lot of them were really relevant to the plot at all. Like, there wasn't really a reason for, the Croc to be there, or the I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this one. The Australian guy. Anyway, yeah, that's unmemorable, unmemorable characters clearly that were not relevant to the plot at all, and they didn't have any sort of like story, like any character progression, and a lot of the once again, the characters were just like lackluster because there wasn't really a point for them being there, and the characters that were important to the plot weren't truly faithful to their character, except for, I guess, Harley Quinn. But Harley Quinn was the best part of that movie anyway. That's why she moved on to the sequel, Birds of Prey, and none of the other characters did. And last but not least, the final fight scene, the CGI was terrible, and the main villain didn't really make sense for her to be the villain. Like, what was really the point? What was really going on? And there were just too many questions left over after watching the movie for it to be considered a good movie in my mind.
Going along with the theme of the live-action remake of Death Note, another really bad movie is the live-action remake of The Last Airbender, based off of the story The Last Airbender, except for the fact that it isn't. The majority of the story and the way that they, bend the elements isn't even done correctly. While also the actors don't seem to have the ability to act. A lot of their emotions seem non-existent. And I mean, that causes a problem with the rest of the movie. And I mean, they butcher the plot, and they could have also followed it relatively well. Their CGI was actually not too bad. It was the way that they tried to recreate the story without, making that clear. I really liked Ready Player One because it made it clear that it wasn't trying to be the book. It was telling the same story, but it was going to use different things to tell the story. So I really liked that movie because it was very clear about that. Unfortunately, both Death Note and The Last Airbender were not clear on that, and therefore I went into it with a certain headspace of expecting to see something that I'm familiar with, but done in live action, and it wasn't done.
For my first pick, I chose a DC movie, so now I'm going to talk about my least favorite Marvel movie, and that is Black Panther. Do not get me started on this movie. We watched it in theaters together, Alex and I, and after the movie, we were just stunned. Like, we were so disappointed after watching this movie. There were so many things that this movie did wrong and just out of character that it would just we were shocked. Like, how? Like, what? Anyway, let me go into the details a little bit for you to give you kind of an idea of where we're at with this movie. In one scene, they show us a bunch of cool and neat and interesting gadgets. Oh yeah, this is cool. It's like a spy movie. They go into the back room. They show you all the cool gadgets that you're going to be seeing the main character use throughout the entire movie. Well, they weren't used at all. We didn't see all these cool gadgets being used in the movie, so that scene was pointless. And that's not all. When the main villains in Black Panther, there were like two of them, but one of them didn't really matter, and the other one, which was like the major villain, he was kind of just underwhelming because he could have been a very interesting character and they just killed him off. But not just that. They used his story as a gateway to talk about political, racial subjects that did not need to be present in a superhero movie, right? If I'm watching a superhero movie, I don't want to talk about racial inequality in a superhero movie where the main character is black. Like, I'm already watching a superhero movie where the main character is black. You don't need to shove more stuff down my throat. Like, I get it. I'm here to watch an interesting movie, not dive into racial equality or segregation or whatever thing they wanted to focus on for that movie. It did not need to be present, and it was just uncalled for. Anyway, I could talk about Black Panther all day, but unfortunately, we have to move on.
The last movie that I think is absolutely terrible is the movie Eragon. So if any of you are familiar with the books, you know why I hate this movie. And if you're not, well, I'm about to tell you. The problem with Eragon, while it did have great cinematic effects and a pretty decent soundtrack, and Jeremy Irons, who was probably the best part of the movie, if I'm honest, despite all of that, it didn't follow the book at all. And it followed this same kind of narrative of not telling anybody that it wasn't going to follow the book. And one of the big issues is it kind of shot itself in the foot, because they killed people who weren't supposed to be killed until later books. And then they also left out entire arcs of character growth. There's an entire chapter in the book where they go to this town, and they have to, research stuff. But while this is happening, the dragon, Saphira, doesn't actually just magically grow when she goes to fly. She keeps growing over time. And that's actually one of the big themes in the book, is that dragons don't stop growing. They, are born and then they just keep growing until they die, which is a very long time. They end up being very massive dragons. And this is actually a pretty important point in later books, because there's magic that's used on other dragons that come around and get bigger, and then there's explanations. And unfortunately, because of the way that they did it, they weren't able to create a sequel, because they killed the Razak, which, negated basically his cousin's entire growth story, which is actually phenomenal. It also, they used Leather Blocka with Durza, and the Leather Blocka were their own species, not a magical shadow spell that can create a dragon. That was an extremely inaccurate part of the movie, and there were many other pieces that there was just so much inaccuracy that they made it impossible to ever create a sequel off of that movie and have it be any good. So that is why that is one of my top most hated movies. But the movie we're about to talk about is by far worse. I would watch every single one of these movies we've mentioned up to this point if it meant I never had to hear, see, or talk about this movie again. It is that bad. It is atrocious. And mind you, I'm not a big fan of horror to begin with, but this wasn't even horror. This was just a butcher shop of terrible.
Alex was not kidding when he said how terrible this next movie is. In fact, I want to give you guys a visual reference, kind of an idea of where we're at with this movie. Alright, so if you just give me a second, I'm going to stand up here. All of the movies that we talked about previously, they're kind of like up here, and that's that's fine. They're just mildly terrible movies, right? And then Alex and I kind of hate horror movies for reasons. So most horror movies are down here, underneath those movies. But we can't just talk about horror movies all day, right? But now this movie in particular, and I'm going to tell you the name of it right now, it is The Lazarus Effect, right? Now the Lazarus Effect, see, if you go all the way down to the floor, right? All the way down, touching the floor right now, all the way down to the floor, right? I'm on the second story of this apartment building. I'm on the second story, and if you go all the way down to the first story, right? You go all the way down to the first story, and then you put your head against the ground, right? And then you just, you try to listen very closely. You might be able to hear the screams of how terrible this movie is from the depths of hell. And that is saying something. All right? That was exhausting. All right. Now, to be honest, we watched this movie a long time ago. So, my memory may be a little skewed when it comes to this movie, because I chose to not rewatch this movie for very good reasons. But we can go into how terrible this movie is without, all the visual references, and actually talk about, the actual plot of the movie. Oh, wait. Yeah, right. Plot. Because movies need to have a plot, right? This movie had these scientists that were making terrible decisions that, normal scientists and, smart people would not make these decisions. The monster or whatever that they create with, by using the Lazarus Effect or whatever. Anyway, it was uneventful. The movie was not scary in the slightest. It just left you sitting there questioning your existence, why did I decide to watch this movie? And the end of the movie lacks any kind of resolution to the plot at all. In fact, you're left wondering what just happened and why there was no ending to the movie. probably because the people who were making the movie couldn't stand the thought of continuing production on this terrible movie, and yet somehow it made it into theaters. Honestly, do not watch this movie under any circumstances for your own well-being. Please. And with that being said, let us know how you like this video. Go ahead, leave a thumbs up if you liked it, and tell us, have you seen any of these movies? What is your least favorite movie? Let us know in the comment section down below. And with that being said, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell, because you are not going to want to miss any of the videos that we have planned for you guys. This has been VNI Nation. Thank you, and goodbye.